My name is Kate Egerton. As George said, I am a coach at the Graduate Writing Center. I work with students one-on-one in addition to providing workshops like this one. It is the best job around. I will defend that statement. I love working with students individually. You guys learn so much interesting stuff. You create so much new knowledge, and then you package it and tell me about it. And I tell students, if you can explain it to me, I can help you explain it to everybody. That's my job, and it's a really great job. So I'm glad to be here. Before I get into the writing process, I want to point out a page in your packet called Learning Tools. This is a handout that encapsulates a portion of the Writing Center's website. We understand that by the time you come to MPS, you are not only all individually different learners, you're probably not the same student you were the last time you were in a university setting. The military may have decided that you're going in a whole new direction in your intellectual life. You may have new family responsibilities. Many of you have been deployed, have been through all sorts of different kinds of experiences. You may be dealing with new medical challenges, new family responsibilities, all those things. We do want you to understand that it is possible to discuss academic accommodations for your learning needs at this institution. It works differently here than it does at most American civilian universities. That conversation begins with your program officer and your faculty and the Dean of Students office. All of these people want to respect your privacy. They all want to support your success. But if you have a need to talk about academic accommodations, please know that you can begin that conversation. And if those of us at the Writing Center can be of any help and support, please let us know. Okay, that's something that we feel strongly about. So let's talk about what expert writers do. Expert writers use this process. The process I'm talking about today is not for beginners. It's not training wheels. This is what people who succeed doing this work every single day rely upon. Okay? Expert writers embrace the process and they practice writing early and often. Putting off writing until later is generally not a strategy for success as a graduate student. It may have worked for you as an undergrad. It may have worked for you in some limited workplace settings. The utility of that technique might be over soon. Just a fair warning. And I want to talk today about a particular pivot, a point that happens in academic writing that I think it's important for you to understand, that you're going to spend time writing to learn as you are exposed to vast amounts of new information and you're trying to figure things out and solve problems. And then there's going to come a point in your process where you need to start writing what you now know to explain to other people. So we're going to spend some of our time talking about writing to learn, and then what happens and what changes when you start writing to explain. And this is going to guide us all the way through. So most of people who are studying at MPS are working toward a large culminating project, whether it's a thesis or a capstone project or comprehensive written exams, and we know this piece is in your future. Depending on your curriculum, you may be writing large amounts from the very beginning. You may already be starting to write papers in the first or second or third week of your first quarter. Some of you will be doing other kinds of work, largely during your coursework, and then one day, all of a sudden, people will say, now you're going to write your thesis. And then you'll go, oh, right. I have to write this down. I can't just sort of show my charts and say, here's my data. I have to present this larger document. We are here to help you regardless of whether you're writing earlier in your project time at MPS or whether you're doing more writing toward the end. So I'm going to talk about this process of writing in 5 stages, and let me give you a quick overview of what we're doing. Talking about writing to learn, I'm going to talk about the stages of invention and drafting, and then we're going to sort of pivot to once you have a baseline of information you've decided you want to share, to talking about revision and talking about editing, getting the document itself in good form, what you have said in the way you want to say it. And then we're going to add one more piece, talking about finalizing that document, getting it ready to deliver to particular readers, and the kinds of polishing, the kinds of concerns that you're going to have at that point. And if you give all 5 of these stages some space, you will reach a point in your ability to communicate your ideas that you may not have been able to reach before. If you were the kind of writer as an undergraduate who could wait till the last 3 hours before this paper was due, sort of shake your brain really hard and type fast and come up with something that was acceptable, you will be amazed at how much better you can be when you insert time and this level of process into your writing. It really makes a difference. You will surprise yourself. You will impress the people you write for. Both of these are things we want. So when we start practicing writing, one of the first things we're going to encourage you to do, and it's something that nobody particularly volunteers for, is we're going to say start writing before you feel ready. People want to procrastinate about writing. People want to push writing off. If you can build writing practice into your schedule from the very beginning of graduate school, you will both increase your learning and comprehension, and you will increase your comfort with writing. Both of these things will help you. So feel free to start before you're ready. At the same time, early on, don't push yourself to exhaustion. Stop before you're absolutely feel like you've put in everything you can. Build in time to write. And this advice comes from a scholar named Robert Boyce, who studies actually academic writers who face procrastination as sort of a professional crisis. And he said if you can program writing time into your daily schedule in small increments and repeat, that you can get an immense amount written without the stress of the late night sort of deadline pressure and oh my God, and those things that we're all familiar with. So that's important. So let's go back to this process and talk a little bit about what these stages mean. Invention is something that has gone by many different names. Different writing teachers talk about it differently. All sorts of things can be invention. If you start writing as early in the process as possible, writing as you take notes on source material, writing as you brainstorm, what does this prompt or this test question mean? Writing as you start formulating outlines. The more you write in the early stages, the more seamless transition you can make into what we're going to think about as a first draft. And the first draft for many of us is the largest obstacle to getting a paper written. It's not the part of the process that most writers enjoy a lot, but it is a necessary point, and we know we all have to get there. And those are both in the context of writing to learn. But one thing happens in the drafting process that really hurts people is that we get completely sort of bound up with perfectionism. That we start writing a sentence and we think the sentence isn't good enough, and we delete and we erase and we sit there and we sweat. And Anne Lamott, who is a wonderful writer on writing, explains to us that perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. It is the enemy of the people. It will keep you cramped and insane your whole life. And it is the main obstacle between you and a shitty first draft. Ladies and gentlemen, shitty first drafts are good things and they will help you. All right? I see writers every single day on this campus who are struggling to get a first draft out because they feel they don't live up to their own standards. Meet those standards, thank them, dismiss them, and send them out of the room. Okay? When you're writing a first draft, you are impressing nobody. You need to impress nobody. You need to care about impressing anybody. Just, give yourself a little bit of a break. Be nice to yourself. It's okay. It's going to work. I don't like writing first drafts either. I would rather do anything else on an average day than write a first draft. I am a wizard at a lot of the other parts of this process, but I don't love first drafts. I would rather do all of the things later that involve writing a first draft. But I'm going to encourage you to think about writing the way you think about physical training. If I woke up on a random morning in April and said, I'm going to run the Big Sur Marathon this week, I would probably end up in the hospital. Okay? If you're going to run a marathon, you start a training program. You start it way ahead of time. You train incrementally. You have a plan. That kind of discipline will also serve your writing career, particularly in graduate school. Don't run to exhaustion every day when you're training. You schedule your training runs so that eventually you can get the whole marathon done. So while we're drafting, though, what specific things should we do? What are things that will help you write a first draft with less procrastination, less perfectionism, and less suffering? Here's a list. My first piece of advice, and this is not a all one-size-fits-all thing. Different writers like to approach these things in different ways, but this is kind of a heretical idea that I'd like to share with you in case you're the kind of person for whom this will work. When you draft, try starting somewhere in the middle. I'm going to recommend that you don't write an introduction first. I'm going to suggest you choose something you already understand reasonably well that your reader needs to know. Pick low-hanging fruit. Start something you know you're going to have to write about that feels accessible to you. Cite as you go. Keep track of whose words, ideas, and data belong to whom, but don't worry about perfecting your notes in your citations at this point. Just make sure you leave yourself a breadcrumb trail, because how you cite is going to depend on your discipline. You may be learning whole new systems of citation if you're changing academic disciplines in graduate school. We will help you do this in the Writing Center. When you get stuck, if you get stuck, and you will get stuck at some point, skip around. Skip to another part of your project. Find something else that seems inviting. But when you're writing a first draft, minimize the amount of time you spend staring at a computer screen going, I have no idea about this. Minimize that time. Minimize that suffering. It is self-imposed. Don't do it to yourself. Okay? Because once you have a first draft, ladies and gentlemen, your best thing you can do is go away from the paper. If you write early, you can then set the draft aside to marinate, like a fine cut of meat that you're going to put on the grill for dinner. And you go do something else. And maybe you do a problem set for another class. Maybe you go play with your kids. Maybe you drive down the coast, enjoy being in Monterey. You want to take some time away. Okay? When you come back, you will be at the heart of the academic writing process, which is in the point of revision. Revision is where it happens. Revision is where you get to sound good. Okay? Don't worry about your first draft sounding good. Your first draft is supposed to be what? Shitty. Got it. Excellent. Your revised draft is where you sound fabulous, and we're going to help you get to that point. So when you revise, what do? Here's some things that I suggest. When you revise, start looking at paragraphs. Start sort of either forming paragraphs or identifying paragraphs out of that first shitty draft, and look at them as units of thought. A paragraph in an academic paper probably has 3 different parts. The first part, and the most important, actually, is a topic sentence, which gives the scope and shape of the information to come in the paragraph. It is essentially here is the rule of this particular paragraph. Here's what's coming. It is a contract, it is a promise. In my first drafts, the sentence that best says that usually isn't at the beginning of the paragraph. In my first drafts, that sentence, if it exists at all, is usually at the end. And it's my job during revision to find that topic sentence and move it to where it will best help the reader, not in its original location where I first came up with it. You're going to follow a topic sentence with new information, usually from an outside source, data, quotation, paraphrase, summary, all sorts of things. And then you're going to add your analysis, as the other speakers today have been talking about. And they're all going to fit within the shape of this paragraph. Making those paragraph level units is what is going to occupy a large amount of your time in revision. Once you have units that you have some confidence in, then you can do a sort of quick outline. If you're not even, I'm not a writer who likes to use very formal outlines ahead of time. There are writers who do, and if you're that kind of writer, congratulations, do what works for you. But if I'm using this rather sort of chaotic jump around and draft idea, there has to be a point where I'm putting order onto chaos, and this is where I do it. I then take my draft and I need to sort of have a quick snapshot of what's going on. So at this point, I quickly outline the draft that I have, not the draft that I think I want. And I often do it just on a legal pad, or I do it in the margin of my paper, online or in a printout. And then I can fill gaps and I can kill repetition. If I've said something 4 or 5 times, which I am personally prone to do, I can corral all of those occurrences and put them together and choose the best version, which is often a hybrid or 2 or 3 of the others. And if I have not explained anything at all, it's now very obvious to me what I still have to draft. At this point, I work on revising my thesis statement. And here I'm talking about the thesis as the statement that controls the paper, the main argument, as opposed to the thesis that you turn in at the end of your time here to get your degree. I revise the thesis statement and I place it front and center, as Sandy and John have been talking about. I am telling the reader right up front what I am going to prove. Could I have done that before I did all this work? No. But am I trying to let the reader duplicate my wandering in the dark woods as I went around and around in circles trying to learn all this information? Absolutely not, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to hide that information as much as I can. I'm trying to sound brilliant. I'm trying to sound incredibly well organized. Bottom line up front, thesis goes at the beginning. And then, I'm going to write the introduction that I skipped when I drafted, because I now want to write an introduction that serves that thesis statement, and that is the introduction's only job. It might contain some background information, it might contain a particular anecdote, it might contain something else, but nothing that doesn't set up the thesis statement belongs in my intro, in my world. So I'm going to put it somewhere else if that's not what happens. In the conclusion, I'm not going to repeat my introduction, although many of you in school were probably taught that an introduction looks like an inverted pyramid with the thesis at the point, and then you have 3 points in descending order of importance, and then you repeat the thesis, and then you broaden back out again. When I was in middle school, those paragraphs were called bang, bang, and bongo, and I resent the space that information takes in my head. First of all, 3 is not a magic number. You can have any number of paragraphs you need. And 3, I see students working super hard to divide everything into 3. It's okay. Other numbers exist. You can use numbers other than 3. And your conclusion should not repeat your introduction, although I'll share one thing with you that is often important. Sometimes when I'm struggling to write an introduction at the end of this process, I will realize that I have already done that the conclusion I wrote early in my paper, or the conclusion I wrote in my revision, turns out, in fact, to be a pretty good introduction with a little bit of trimming and a little bit of chopping. And if you want some help with that transition and what that looks like, come see us at the Writing Center and the coaches will help you. So this is all stuff that happens in the revision phase, and this is the heart of the writing process. Only at this point are we ready to deal with sentences. And again, if you can, take time away from your draft. If you can put it away after you've done a lot of revision before you start working on sentences, you'll be the better for it. You get the draft out of the front of your head. You want to create distance, no matter how much time you have, between your text and your brain, reading sentences out loud, or better yet, having somebody else read them to you. And that person doesn't need to have any particular understanding of your topic to be able to read the paper out loud. I sometimes draft my teenager, and if the inducement is sweet enough, he's usually willing to help. I help him with his homework. Occasionally, he helps me with mine. It's also very useful to take sentences out of order, because I'm really good at looking at the first sentence of a paper and saying, okay, what are the units, what's going on here? But once you get caught up in the narrative, especially if the paper is telling you an interesting story, it is very difficult to look at sentences. So taking the sentences out of order, jumping around the paper, is often a good way to go. When you're looking at sentences, there are a couple of things you know you want to look for. Is there a subject? Is there a verb? Do they agree? So let's start with the basics, right? English sentences need subjects and verbs, singular subjects need singular verbs, etc. Are you punctuating consistently? And notice I said consistently instead of correctly. The different citation systems you will use according to the disciplines you are in don't, in fact, all share exactly the same punctuation rules. Some of these rules are matters of custom and opinion as opposed to rules at all. Some of us are language outlaws and manage to hide that fact much of the time. But your readers, your academic professor readers, will mostly notice when you punctuate inconsistently. I don't use the serial comma. Every third time I have a list of 3 things. Drives people crazy. But if you say, here's my rule and I am applying it all the time, you can get away with that a little bit better. So you want to check consistency and does your punctuation match the style you're using. And make sure you're spelling everybody's name correctly. You think, oh, come on, really? The record in thesis processing for variant spellings of Muammar Gaddafi on one page is 3. Don't do that. And the professors who care if you misspell their name won't tell you in advance. So don't do that either. Only at this point do I let Microsoft Word or other sort of computer software tools express their opinions about spelling and grammar. Microsoft Word spell check is basically a good thing in the world, except when it's not. Please use it, but please don't rely on it as your only form of proofreading. If you would like horrible stories of embarrassment, come talk to me, and I will share several of my students' previous experiences. You will sink through the floor in sympathy and shame, okay? And the grammar check on Microsoft Word has not notably improved in the last 15 years, and it wasn't very good in 2003. So just buyer beware. If Word says it's great, frankly, if Grammarly says it's great, take that with a big grain of salt and make sure you're relying on other sources of information. Both of those tools are problematic. So what am I talking about when we do finalize? Where I'm talking about finding and following your correct format. If you are writing a thesis or a capstone project, you will be provided with a fabulous and detailed template from the Thesis Processing Office. They are fonts of amazing wisdom and information, and they will help you. Short of that, knowing what kind of format professors expect is going to vary from faculty member to faculty member. Ask for models, ask for instruction, ask to see, ask questions. Ask for help if you're not sure exactly what's necessary. Unless somebody tells you otherwise, double spacing is a kindness, especially for people like me who are developing short arm disease. If you send me a paper in the Writing Center and it's single-spaced, I will double-space it before I read it. Don't take it personally. It's my eyes, not yours. Check name spellings one more time. Now is the point where you want to perfect those citations and reference styles according to your chosen style. Please do not mix and match. Don't put parenthetical citations on page 3 and Chicago-style footnotes on page 5. That's not cool. There is an amazing, amazing tool available on this campus to help you with this quite specific, somewhat onerous task. If you go to the main page of the Dudley Knox Library's website, and on the bottom there are 4 large round buttons, and one of them is orange, and it says how to cite. There is a wealth of information and NPS-specific models for APA, for Chicago, for IEEE, for every citation style that somebody on this campus would use. And it does the things that the citation manuals themselves are often silent about. How do you cite a field manual? How about an executive order? How about Marine Corps doctrine? How about all those kinds of things? We have information about how to cite that material. We want to make it easy for you. Please let us at the Writing Center help you do this. The thesis processors will appreciate it when the time comes for your work to come to them. I see them nodding in the back row. Okay? Make sure you're delivering your work through the proper channels. Not every professor wants to get things in the same way. The Thesis Processing Office has their own routines. And you want to make sure that you keep archived copies of all of this work, from your earliest scratch notes, from your bibliographies, from your drafts. As Sandy said a little while ago, the librarians spend a lot of time helping students figure out where that perfect quotation on page 27 is from. It doesn't help when the student says, I think I found it in a book and the book was blue. And the librarians are wizards, but you probably don't have that time to spend several weeks before graduation. If you keep things, you will be amazed at what is helpful later. Cloud storage is nearly infinite at this point. It's not going to cost you anything here at NPS. Please don't get rid of stuff until you have your degree in hand, and then you can decide what your long-term archive plans are. But don't get rid of papers, don't get rid of drafts, don't get rid of notes until you're done with your whole process. The Graduate Writing Center is here for you. We operate primarily as a one-on-one coaching situation, but we also do workshops. We also provide a lot of online resources. We're trying to support you and your learning, as George said at the beginning, with zero judgment all the way along. We meet you where you are. We help you get where you want to go. When you come to the Writing Center, you're in charge. You come to us, you tell us what you want to work on, you develop a relationship with us, we help you. It's not a class, it's not a curriculum, there isn't a syllabus. It's you reaching out for support to make your work here better. We want you to build writing habits now that will support you through your thesis and beyond. Capable, persuasive, evidence-based writing is an important professional skill that a lot of people walking around in this country do not have. And people who have that skill and can wield it successfully are successful in their careers in a wide variety of leadership situations. Writing can be a very powerful thing that you take out of this institution in addition to your degree. And nobody can take it away from you for anything. So let us help you out. That's what we're here for.